and welcome to a special edition of World Insight, coming to you from Summer Davos 2019. Let Innovation Speak. I'm Tian Wei. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said Tuesday at the World Economic Forum for New Champions that China would speed up its opening up of various sectors and that China was determined to stick to the path of openness no matter the circumstance.
We need to follow the trend of globalization and promote free trade and trade investment, liberalization and facilitation. We need to promote equal rights, equal opportunities, and fair rules, and improve institutional arrangements on that basis.
At the same time, he said China was committed to the reform of WTO and the rule-based trading order. This is especially significant after the G20 agreed to WTO reform in the final declaration.
The rules-based and WTO-centered multilateral trading system is the foundation of economic globalization and free trade. It also safeguards the world's economy's stable growth. We must respect and protect its authority and effectiveness. China supports the necessary WTO reforms, but the principle of free trade must be upheld.
On the sideline of the Summer Davos in Dalian, we talked to Dr. Mari Elka Pangestu, a professor at the University of Indonesia. She's also former Minister of Trade of Indonesia. Also with us in the discussion, Benjamin Harburg, a managing partner from MSA Capital. Mari and Ben, welcome to CGTN. Thank you so much for sharing your time.
Thank you.
First question, G20 summit concluded with a declaration and in it several key words about trade, climate change and many other issues. Mari, what is your take of it as a long-time trade minister coming from Indonesia?
Well, you said it well. At least there was a communique. I kind of followed the drama on the trade paragraphs quite closely. And while we were disappointed that the fight against protectionism was not in there and multilateral rules-based trading system didn't really make it, but at least there's some language there about the need for WTO reform. And I think the other disappointing thing is that there's no description of the way forward. Because I think G20 can play a very important role as kind of the political will to push the processes that has to happen in Geneva for the WTO reforms to actually take place. And the urgency is rescuing the dispute settlement system, because that's very important for small countries like Indonesia. That's the way you can actually also resolve the trade tensions between these two big elephants. We are kind of watching these two big elephants fight and trying to get out of the way, but we really can't get out of the way. And then all the needed WTO reforms to keep WTO relevant, whether it's the technology, the e-commerce, or the subsidies issue. It needs to have a longer-term agenda to address these very strategic issues. So,
what does that mean to investors like you?
I think it means, certainly in China, a focus on developing core technology, so investing in chips, AI, algorithms, so areas that China had often relied on the United States for, or inputs from research strategies from U.S. universities or corporates. I think there will be a lot less of that collaboration. We've already seen cancer researchers pulled out of U.S. universities now, and chip makers returning home. I think it creates opportunities in China in the long term. I think China will develop native.
Domestic market probably will play a bigger role. Do you agree, Mari? What does that mean for the other economies, for example, Indonesia?
I think it's a double-edged sword, but I think what's going to happen is like a reconfiguration of investment as well as trade. And I think what we need to do is two things. I think uncertainty with the trading system is still going to be very damaging for us, despite the opportunity for relocation.
Because that's a dampening effect on the economy as a whole.
Right, and China's economy, which is our largest trading partner now, right? So I think we still have to keep focus on making sure that somehow there can be a way out that is not the deal between the two countries alone. Because if they're trying to make a deal, and we know the issues are going beyond the tariffs and deficit issue, it's got subsidies, technology, state-owned enterprises, more competitive environment, etc., etc. It's better to deal with that under a WTO umbrella rather than bilaterally, because bilaterally, I think they can create their own rules, and then where are we going to be at? The other countries who are not party to.
I think that's a question a lot of countries are asking, a lot of economies are asking, whether they are relevant in the overall process. But on the other hand, you also see, Marie, other countries do not want to come into this debate at this moment, because when two of the largest economies in the world are debating, you do not want to be this collateral damage in the very middle of it. So how to make sure, from an economy like yours, the best degree to engage and disengage all at the same time? That's a very tricky and artful skill, I guess, you have to have. Marie.
So I think we don't want to be trampled, and we don't want to have to take sides. So we need to continue engaging both with the U.S. and China in as much as possible that we can, because Indonesia is also, I think, number 15 out of the deficit countries. So we are facing our own bilateral issues, and at the same time we need to push regional economic integration. So push opening up further our markets between each other, and it's not just for a regional bloc. It's actually going to benefit globally, and also seek partnerships with major partners like Europe. Vietnam has just signed an FTA, a CEPA, I should say, a partnership agreement with EU. Indonesia is negotiating with the EU. Hopefully by next year it will be completed. So you continue expanding to reduce the uncertainty as much as you can. But at the end of the day, the rules-based trading system on all those issues that are on the table needs to happen sooner or later.
Marie gave a very comprehensive and sophisticated solution list already as to how an economy uprising like Indonesia, but also very vibrant as well, need to deal with the situation. But there are a lot of uncertainties while Marie was trying to illustrate this sophisticated plan. And therefore, shouldn't the U.S. and China also feel encouraged and urged, in a way, by all the other economies to come to the table and come out with a reasonable, whether it's a bilateral deal or the deal that could be inspiring to the others as well? Ben?
Yeah, I think unfortunately this is an administration that's retrenching from multilateral institutions across the board.
It's just a matter of fact.
Yeah, climate change, the United Nations, WTO, it doesn't matter. It's now become a bilateral world where we deal countries one-on-one, and we use the power of tariffs, even in contexts where they might not apply.
So you're saying, Marie, don't dream anymore. Reality.
I'm a pragmatist. She might be.
But here is the thing. What about the other options? Marie earlier raised a few of them. For example, regionalization. For example, bilateral and multilateral cooperation on various platforms, as many as possible, as good quality as possible. Then will that be a good opportunity for investors? This is a new picture for you guys, I guess.
Absolutely. So I mean, this block of Southeast Asia, which is 600,000 or 600 million.
And ASEAN +1, +2, +3, +6 right now.
Or MENA, what we call now MENA TP, MENA plus Turkey and Pakistan, 530 million people.
Africa even.
Right. So these are massive markets with relatively similar kind of consumer taste, relatively similar in terms of their evolution, in terms of technology adoption. And so you can create companies that are regional plays, like you have in Southeast Asia, the ride-sharing giants or e-commerce giants, and those become massive opportunities for investors globally to tap into, and we've been chasing that.
The other thing, of course, is about the WTO reform. As you all talk about, the multilateral approach is the best approach for economies of all sizes. So let's talk about WTO reform. Now, in the G20 declaration, there is a thing called the WTO reform being mentioned, and yet some people suggest that there are different interpretations as to why those words are being put into the original script by different economies. So Ben, from the investor's perspective, of course, WTO is so far away from you in a way because you don't have to deal with that mechanism every day. But at the same time, its reform will have a huge impact on how trade will be done, investment opportunities. How do you see that?
The key word for us is uncertainty, right? If there is not a framework for these types of collaboration and we can have ad hoc moments like we've had over the last few months, that jeopardizes businesses, that jeopardizes supply chains, that makes people want to hold their money back and not invest in.
And it's already happening, I have to say.
Right. I mean, if you look at the amount of money now that Chinese money is no longer going into America. There's potential that these capital markets become balkanized, and Chinese companies come back home, and American capital stays home. If you took what Bannon is trying to do to heart, right? And so the fear is that it enables a world that is divided and hurts trade at the end of the day and hurts countries from rising up.
So WTO reform, as complicated as it is, I'm having a big sigh when I'm saying it, Mari, but you, as a former trade minister, have to deal with that for a long time, and now certainly a more dramatic time to deal with it. What do you consider are the most important obstacles facing us right now?
Well, I think Ben said it very well. I think the uncertainty is increased, and it's because the rules base is being questioned or even sidelined. They're ignoring the rules, which creates a lot of uncertainty. And uncertainty means greater cost for business, and then that means consumers are going to have to pay more, right? So I think there's going to,
at the end of the day, no matter how politically they are framing this.
Yeah. So there's all these numbers. American consumers are presumably paying, what, $2,000? If the whole thing is going to be tarified, they're going to pay I think, $2,200 more per family per year for their goods. So
we see various numbers coming out.
And I think the urgency of the WTO reforms is, first of all, it's dispute settlement, because you can have trade conflicts. In the past, it's been resolved by the dispute settlement, and then you continue your trade and investment.
And that's the teeth of WTO.
And that's the most urgent issue to reform, because it is, the panel judges are expiring at the end of the year, and then you have no more judges, then you cannot have a panel, right? So that's the most urgent one. And then you have to identify issues which can only be solved at the multilateral level.
Like what? Like what?
Subsidies. Subsidies cannot be done kind of at a regional level. It has to be done at a multilateral level. So it's the agriculture subsidies, which is the remaining issues, and the industrial subsidies. And then things like technology, all the e-commerce agreement and what to do with technology and data flows, that also has to be done at a multilateral level. And this is very important because, as we know, this is one of the kind of the disruptions that are happening. And if you want to benefit from it, you really need the rules and the governance and the security issues to be dealt with and so on.
But the question really is, Ben, given your fascination about geopolitics as an investor, what about whether WTO reform will be caught in the crossfire of geopolitics? I guess it's already, and therefore putting much more difficulty in the real reform and the real discussion of WTO.
I think so. I think especially from the U.S. context, a lot of what's being done is driving votes domestically, right? These are now things to appeal to domestic voters and not necessarily to the business leaders and the bureaucrats who really understand these issues at a high level. And so when that kind of becomes one of the major considerations in a negotiation, it's very difficult to deal with things in a long-term context, which is what's needed to solidify this framework.
And Madam Minister?
I think we need, in the vacuum of leadership from the U.S., the others have to step up, whether it's China, whether it's EU, whether it's Japan, whether it's ASEAN. There needs to be more of a collective leadership.
But we don't have a blueprint that were earlier worked out, right? After the Second World War, you have the Bretton Woods system in which everything quite clearly mapped out. But now it seems to be a lot of moving parts, and nobody knows and who should be, in a way, responsible for putting things together, Madam Minister?
Yeah, there's no roadmap, but I think what needs to happen is those countries like ASEAN trade is very important. It's been the mainstay for our growth and development for the last 3 decades. So for us, trade is very important. So I think there has to be, in the past we relied on U.S. U.S. was playing a leadership role. Now in that vacuum, who has to step up? How should we be stepping up to that leadership role? And I think that's crucial in the absence of the U.S. I don't know when they're going to come back to the table.
Ben, do you have more information?
If I have anything to say about it, we will. I mean, this role of abdicating our role of leadership is the wrong approach.
But then, you know, Madam Minister, how is the most important thing, isn't it? When you are saying fill in the vacuum of leadership, let others also work together towards some solution. But how? That is the question being asked.
I think a few of the middle powers need to step up, you know. I mean, G20 was an attempt. And a lot of the regional agreements can already address some of the issues. But
like what? Like what?
Like you take e-commerce agreement, CPTPP does have a chapter on e-commerce. It can be the template for any future agreements on this. It's maybe not the right one, but at least it's the beginning of a conversation, and it can inform the rules in the multilateral negotiations later on.
Ben, any input?
Yeah, I think that this framework needs to be put in place across the board. Everything we do, from payment solutions, the infrastructure that's driving and guiding all of our investments, that will filter down into all of those customer-level companies require that kind of framework at a higher level, and it can be done regionally or internationally.
And we are at a multilateral framework anyway. I mean, the World Economic Forum itself is a multilateral approach. Before we go, what do you think is the most important message when we think about the future, the immediate and probably a bit longer term as well? Ben, I want to go with you first, and then Mari, please.
What I'm trying to work towards as a person and as a business is to bring a world that's more integrated and less siloed, where research is collaborative, where countries work to solve these problems in international fora, and where supply chains are integrated. And we're moving away from that, and that deeply frightens me.
Mari.
I think we have to address the uncertainty issue, and it's not just trade, it's the technology, it's the climate change, and that needs leadership as well as a short-term action and a medium-term, more strategic plan.
Absolutely. Mari, Ben, thank you so much for sharing your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.